You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. Thank you so much for joining us once more for yet another episode of murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history. And also, thank you for your ongoing support, your messages, your ratings and reviews, your votes whenever we ask you. I mean, basically, thank you for being the best listeners we could have hoped for.
That's right. We're the award-winning podcast whose hosts are on 2 different continents. I still can't believe we've never met in real life. It still hasn't happened. Just recently, somebody asked, has that happened yet? Nope, still hasn't happened. We have never met. And as always, we want to give a special shout out to our newest Patreon members. And they are Misty Grinnell. Misty. Hi, Misty. She is one of my real life best friends. Thanks, Misty. Also, thank you to Amber Cones. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to Nail Design by Katie. Very grateful. We're very, very grateful. You know that your support helps to pay for our newspaper subscriptions, which are really surprisingly very, very expensive. And the fees to keep all of this going, the hosting fees, which are not nothing. And so we are very, very grateful. We have 2 game nights this month. I was really sad, everybody, to unexpectedly miss the most recent one, but the next one is this Friday, the 18th of November, and I am really, really looking forward to it. It's going to be awesome.
We missed you, but we still had a lot of fun.
I missed all of you. I'm sorry I was completely passed out post-migraine attack and didn't know what year it was. It was a bad scene, but it's all right. It's going to be better this week. I've had my Botox. I'm getting closer and closer to being completely unable to form expressions on my face, which means it's working. So, all right, let's get into today's episode. Today, we want to talk about another family annihilator, which is someone who kills their entire family, or at least they try to. So far, we have talked about a couple of cases where somebody murdered or tried to murder everyone in their family, including the John List case, Charles Lawson, which were both in the USA, and then, of course, we covered Elmer Crawford in Australia.
Also, I think Mata Marek, kind of, I'd say.
Oh, right. Less of a single event situation and more of a... But she murdered her husband and one of her 2 children and her aunt. Is that right?
Yeah, but the second child had been poisoned as well, so she definitely tried to murder her whole family.
That's right.
Yeah. If you don't know what we're talking about, this is about the Austrian serial killer Mata Marek. We have covered the case in episode 40. That's been a long time ago.
I know. Jeez. What episode is this? Do you know?
176, I'd say. 75? 175, 176, something like that.
Wow. That's a lot. All right. So 4 family annihilators then that we can remember. I really hope we didn't forget anyone we've covered already. But this week is a little bit different. This week it is not one of the parents murdering the family, it's one of the kids. Today we're going to talk about Lowell Lee Andrews, who murdered his family on Thanksgiving of 1958. We've got some Thanksgiving episodes now, y'all. Get ready.
Yeah.
Terrible things.
I find it so interesting that all different kind of murders have their own name. Like patricide is if you murder your father. There's a word for murdering your uncle and a special word for murdering your aunt. I never heard it before, but yeah, I mean, it happens, right?
It does. Yeah.
All right, so this episode takes place in Kansas, in Walcott to be exact, in the late 50s, like Annie said. Walcott is, or was, a neighborhood in the northwest of Kansas City. You know how we always like to tell you a little bit about the places where our episodes take place, but I didn't find a whole lot about Walcott. Wikipedia just says, quote, Walcott is a neighborhood of Kansas City, Kansas, in the United States. Walcott was originally called Connor, and under the latter name was platted as a village in 1868. When the railroad was extended to that point in 1902, it was renamed in honor of Herbert Walcott, a railroad official, end quote. And that's it. And then it lists one reference. One.
Oh, man.
Just one reference.
Yeah, that's not good, because then what if that one reference is just nonsense? How could you know?
Exactly. But then I also found an article in the Kansas City Star from 5th of November 1978, page 20, titled Residents Rally in Crisis, where they talk a little bit about Walcott, especially during the 50s. So let me read that real quick to you. Quote, "To hear old-timers talk, Walcott hasn't changed much since Andrew's boyhood. The current population of 150 is about the same as it was 50 or 60 years ago. But they can remember when the community, never incorporated but now part of Kansas City, Kansas, had a post office, 3 small grocery stores, and a railroad depot. There aren't any stores left, just a small cafe operated by a Mexican-American family who originally came to Walcott to work in nearby fields, and the old depot burned last week. The town started dying," said one area resident, when the interurban railroad between Leavenworth and Kansas City stopped running back in the 1930s. That was another in a series of transportation problems dating back to the late 1800s, when the Missouri River began changing its course away from the settlement, effectively eliminating the barge trade. Passenger trains dropped a Walcott stop about 1950, and bus service ended about a decade ago. During the 1960s, Walcott's 2 biggest enterprises were a truck farming operation, which drew several hundred migrant workers, and a bus salvage company, the biggest in the country, one resident recalled proudly. But those 2 are gone. What remains is vintage Walcott, a friendly, unpretentious blue-collar neighborhood. Walcott has of course seen better days. An empty trolley barn and a scattering of boarded-up buildings are testimony to that. Meanwhile, the community's future is tied to the completion, still years away, of nearby Interstate 435. The highway is a key to plans for an industrial park in Walcott, a proposal that officials in Wyandotte County have dreamed of for years. 20 years later, Walcott's housing market isn't booming, in part because the area is flood-prone. There aren't any new homes, and few of the old ones would sell for more than $15,000.
Wow.
But that doesn't bother Miss Peggy Shannon, 16, a lifelong resident? Okay.
I mean...
But that doesn't bother Miss Peggy Shannon, 16, a lifelong resident. Quote, "Nobody's too good for anybody out here," she said. "If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." End quote.
All right, so we're laughing.
What's her life experience with this?
Listen, in the whole world, there's nowhere else I'd want to be. And I know I've lived here for 16 years, and like 6 of them I can remember. I mean, hey, listen, it might be the best place in the world. It's just, it's an odd, we're not making fun of the fact that that might be a great place to live. We're making fun of
No, not at all, not at all.
16, a lifelong resident. 16. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if there's much there.
I don't know, because this article mentions flooding. Indeed, Walcott did suffer several severe floods. One was in 1993, and here comes the thing. As far as I understand, the town was finally abandoned around 1997. I'm not sure if people are living there once more right now. I did find one source that made it look as if roughly 600 people are living there right now, but I honestly think that's incorrect. I think that must have been the census from before the last big flood. At that time, there were 40 houses in Walcott, so 600 people sounds about right, I'd say. Because I also looked at Google Earth, and I didn't see buildings there. I just saw the Lakeside Speedway, that still exists, and according to a newspaper article, that is hosting races again since 2019. So please, if any of our listeners are from Kansas City, or are actually from Walcott or the area, let us know. Are there residents right now? Because I couldn't figure it out.
No, I looked up the address. You probably did the same, of where the crime we're going to talk about happened. Yeah. And there's literally nothing. I mean, really, really nothing. You can't even tell that something used to be there. It looks like... It actually reminds me a little bit of the property when we did the Hopkinsville encounter, where it's just like farmland on the side of the road with train tracks on the other side of the road, and there's just nothing. There's nothing. And I think it was really rural even in the 1990s, but it was definitely even more rural in the 1950s. And in the 1950s, one of the population of 150 that was living there was one William Lowell Andrews. He was 29 years old when he married the 21-year-old Opal Bernice Halley, in 1937. On October 9th, 1938, their first child is born, a daughter, and they name her Jennie Marie. On September 21st, 1940, their second child is born. This time it's a boy, and they name him Lowell Lee. If you hear any sounds in the background, I think my neighbors are having some landscaping work done, so I apologize for that. The family now lives in a farmhouse in Walcott, located at 6040 Walcott Drive. William works as a mechanic for TWA, and in his spare time, he works on his 250-acre farm.
Fun fact, TWA was the airline owned by Howard Hughes between 1939 and 1960. In 1950, Hughes had changed the airline name from Trans-Western and Continental Airline to Trans World Airline, and Kansas City was at the time the TWA headquarters. TWA played a major role in building what is known today as the Kansas City International Airport, because they planned on using the city as their main hub, with most of their national and international flights leaving from and going to Kansas City. And I think then there were major issues, and TWA then moved their headquarters to St. Louis. So yeah, as an aircraft mechanic in Kansas at that time, it makes absolute sense to work in Kansas City for TWA.
Yeah, so the family is very close. They are parishioners at the Grandview Baptist Church, and everyone just loves them. And I wish we knew more about Jennie and William and Opal, but all we really know is that they were all good people, and that William and Opal loved their children, and they worked really hard to give them a good life and a good education. Jennie Marie was attending Oklahoma Baptist University, where she was studying home economics. Jennie Marie is really outgoing. She's very social. She very frequently has friends back to the house to spend time with the family. She would often talk about her family, especially about her brother. She said how proud she was of him to all of her friends. Lowell Lee, who preferred to be called Lee at this time, he would later prefer to be called Andy, but we'll get into that later. He's described as a nice kid, quiet. He's later described as being, quote, the nicest boy in Walcott by people who knew him. He was a paper boy at one time. His customers later remembered that he was a pleasant and reliable child. On Christmas, he would even hand out candies with his newspapers. He was a good student. He played the bassoon. He didn't really have much of a social life, no close friends, and he never had a girlfriend, and instead preferred to bury his head in books. He really, really loved to read. Nothing wrong with any of that. There's also, I read, no indication that he didn't have a lot of a social life, but I read that he also wasn't antisocial. Like in social situations, he wasn't awkward or nobody thought he was strange.
Yeah. No, he was really well liked.
Yeah, he was really well liked and social. He was just more shy, I guess. You would sort of think that he was just somebody who preferred the company of books. So
yeah, he also was never aggressive or got into any kind of that trouble. He was really, really smart, apparently.
Yeah, very smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think all of us kind of know somebody like that, but they're not anybody that you would say, oh, they were antisocial or anything like that. All right, so by 1958, he had grown up to be a really tall and big guy, measuring either 6 feet or 6 feet 2 inches tall, which would be between 1.82 and 1.88 meters. And he weighed around 260 pounds, which is 118 kilograms. But he had a really friendly baby face. It made him look a little bit younger than he was. After high school, he studied zoology at the University of Kansas, where he also played bassoon in the college band. What nobody knew was what was going on behind this very friendly face of the nicest boy in Walcott, right? Because for several months now, actually since the spring of 1958, he had been planning on murdering his entire family. You see, Lowell wanted money and lots of nice things, and he planned on getting rich by murdering his entire family, inheriting the farm, and selling the 250 acres. He would then take his fortune and move to Chicago or LA to become a hitman for an infamous mob boss. This was the plan.
Sorry that I interrupt, but I hate everything about this so much. First of all, it's kind of if you take a devil child, it's like a childish plan, but with this devilish twist, you know what I mean?
I do.
And it's also, I mean, it's so greedy.
It is.
He wants to murder his family because of greed. I mean, not that we've heard about these kind of things happen before, but it's
Greed is a particularly nasty motive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also the fact that murdering the family wasn't a terrible means to an end, but rather it's not like, well, if I just murder my family, then I'll have everything I want and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But then he didn't want just that. He wanted to murder his family so he would have enough money to then keep on murdering people for money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a different level of person, right? This is a person with absolutely no conscience whatsoever. So at first he planned to poison his family, but then he was worried that it would be too easy to trace back to him. Where was he going to get the poison? Would people remember him buying the poison? Yes, they would. And, who else but him could be the murderer if he's the only one who wasn't poisoned? So big problems with working out poisoning, and he realizes it's not going to work. And so by the fall of 1958, he has another idea. He's going to shoot his family and make it look like a burglary. And he already has the perfect date to do this, Thanksgiving weekend, 1958, when everybody would be home, even his older sister, Jennie Marie. William was home from work for the week because of a week-long union strike. 7,000 mechanics, as well as cargo handlers and service staff, were demanding better wages. The children would both be home from college. Lowell had just failed a sociology exam, which was very atypical for the teenager. And even though his parents were surprised about the bad grade, they were not mad at him, nor had they punished him in any way. So that's also not a motive. Thanksgiving had come and gone. The family enjoyed a lovely family dinner, which was prepared by Opal. Grandma Andrews had been over to celebrate the holiday with them. The next evening, so Friday, 28th of November, Lowell was upstairs in his room reading while the rest of the family was downstairs watching TV.
I think some people always make a big deal about what he was reading. It was the Brothers Karamazov, and my brain will forever call it the Brothers Karamazov, thanks to An American Tale by Dostoevsky. And it is indeed an interesting read for a boy with the intent to murder his parents and sister, I have to say.
Yeah, I also see that mentioned a lot. Is American Tail the mouse and the somewhere out there?
Yeah,
is that
Moskowitz. Mm-hmm.
Brothers Karamazov. Okay.
So the Brothers Karamazov are... Well, the book is about three brothers and their father's murder and the question of who of the three brothers did it. And even though this sounds like a straightforward courtroom drama from late 19th century Russia, it's actually packed with many philosophical questions about moral and free will, and it's definitely not a lighthearted read.
So I have not read that, believe it or not, nor have I read Crime and Punishment, in part because they both seem very heavy and dark and sort of depressing. Do you think I should? Is it worth a read? I'm assuming you've probably read both.
I read them. I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of classic Russian literature for exactly that reason. It's so heavy and depressing. Although I do love the French classics, especially Émile Zola, which is also kind of depressing, but in a more, I don't know, charming way.
No, I like the French classics better too. The Russian classics they're just so depressing. I've started them.
It's always dark and cold and everybody's just
miserable.
Gloomy and...
Yeah. All right.
Not saying they're not great books, don't get me wrong.
No. It's just, if you read for entertainment, sometimes you just don't want to go into that world. At least for me, that's my own personal issue. All right, so around 7 p.m., Lowell puts his book aside. He shaves, he gets dressed nicely. He puts on a nice suit, and then he loads a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle and a .22 caliber revolver, which was a Ruger. He ransacks his room to set the stage for his false burglary claims that he's planning to make, and then he took the two weapons and made his way downstairs, where his family were still enjoying a family evening in front of the television. Thank goodness his sister didn't have any visitors. So he walks into the living room, and he turns on the light, and when his sister turned to look at him because the light had just turned on, he shot her between the eyes, killing her instantly. He then shot 3 times at his mother and twice at his father. And while Jennie Marie had died instantaneously, his parents were still alive. Opal tried to flee, and he fired more shots at her until she stopped moving. William had tried to get away from his son by crawling into the kitchen, but Lowell fired 15 more shots at his father.
It's so interesting how many shots he fired at his father, right?
So many shots.
Like, in total, he shot, I think, 25 shots.
Yeah.
He fired 25 shots, and 17 of those were aimed at his father.
Yeah.
And in case you wonder if anybody heard the shots, there were really no close-by neighbors. Most of Walcott consisted of isolated farmhouses with lots of fields in between the houses. So no, nobody would have heard anything. After Lowell was certain his family was dead, he opened the windows, he messed up the house, then he took the murder weapons and he got in his car, because now it was time to work on that alibi he needed to get away with the triple murder. So first he drove to Lawrence, the home of Kansas University, and also the place where Lowell had rented a room in a boarding house, a place where he stayed during the week. Lawrence lies 56 kilometers or 35 miles west of Walcott, and today that would be a 45-minute drive. I think that night was kind of icy, and it took him longer to get there. His drive took him over the Massachusetts Street Bridge, where he got rid of the weapons and shells, throwing them into the Kansas River. Once he arrived at the boarding house in Tennessee Street, he made sure that he was seen there. I think he chatted with the lady who ran the boarding house. He needed witnesses who could verify his whereabouts.
Yeah, he wants people to remember him. He's like striking up conversations with people.
Yeah, and then he went to see a movie.
As you do, right after you murdered your whole family.
He went to the Granada on Massachusetts Street. The former theater opened in 1934 and it still exists, but it was transformed into a nightclub in the 1990s. But in 1958, it was still a movie theater, and Lowell Lee Andrews went there, as you said, after murdering his whole family, to enjoy a fun movie night. He watched Mardi Gras, a 1958 romance/musical starring Pat Boone and Christine Carrere. After the movie, he drove home, but he stopped at a gas station, once again making sure that he was seen and remembered. Around 1 a.m. on 29th of November 1958, the Wyandotte County Sheriff's Office received a phone call. The caller was a young man who reported a burglary in his family home. As we said before, Walcott was this rural community with 150 people living there. Burglaries might have not been unheard of, but extremely rare. All crime was extremely rare.
Yeah.
When the police officers arrived at the house, they saw a young man sitting on a porch, dressed in a suit and petting a little dog. The man, of course, was Lowell Lee Andrews, and when the police asked what's going on, Lowell just gestured or nodded at the door and said, "In there." The police officers entered the home, every room was fully lit, and what they saw was absolutely horrific and actually unheard of in Walcott, because they found William, Opal, and Jennie Marie lying on the floor, shot several times each. The house was a mess, the drawers were ripped out, the closet doors are open, stuff lying everywhere, and it looked like a home invasion at first, but something was wrong. The fact that a son who had just found his whole family brutally murdered was so calm and composed. I mean, okay, sometimes people who are in extreme shock might appear to be super calm and stoic. I'm more this kind of person.
Yeah, same.
Not everybody reacts the same way.
Right.
But, I mean, we already know that Lowell did it, and we know that he was not in shock at all. He just didn't care. And apparently it didn't cross his mind that his behavior could be considered odd at best and outright suspicious at worst. When asked about his whereabouts that night, he told them that he had gone to Lawrence to the room he rented because he needed to pick up his typewriter that he had forgotten to bring over the holidays, as he needed to work on some college papers. And then he had gone to see a movie which he really enjoyed, and that statement certainly caused a raised eyebrow because, I mean...
Yeah.
His family is dead. Yeah, he's talking about the movie he enjoyed. So something was not right with this young man. And when asked if he knew which funeral home should be tasked with the arrangements, he replied, quote, "I don't care what you do with them," end quote.
Yeah. He didn't have the most well-constructed mask covering his sociopath. I don't even know how to say that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
He just didn't have the most well-constructed mask when facing society. Like,
Yeah.
Even if this was a house of complete strangers, everyone at the scene is going to care what happens next to these people, right? So then the only surviving relative who was supposed to have been on very good terms with his now entire murdered family doesn't. It's like, just put a little effort into it, you know? But it's just nothing. It's like he just doesn't care, and he doesn't even pretend he cares.
Yeah. And I mean, the police officers, they catch on to that fact pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's hard to miss.
It's hard to miss, exactly. And now they are certain that this man was not as innocent as he presented himself. They asked him to come to the police station as they had a couple of more questions, and he followed them calmly. There they offered him a drink, he asked for a Coke, and then they told him that he would need to take a lie detector test and that they would take his fingerprints. And that's when he started to lose his cool. Yeah, he started to get a little bit nervous and actually shed a couple of tears. And of course, the news of the murder spread like wildfire in the little town, and so the reverend of the Grandview Baptist Church showed up at the police station. He knew the family well, he even considered William Andrews as a very close friend, and he offered the sheriff to help and talk to Lowell. And so Reverend Dameron was led into the interrogation room and left alone with Lowell. At first, Lowell denied having anything to do with the murders, but pretty soon he caved and confessed everything. And when asked why he did it, he replied, quote, "It wasn't a case that they wouldn't give me what I wanted. It was a case they couldn't. I would like to have a sports car, and I would have liked to have had $1 million. End quote. And then when the Reverend asked him if he felt better now, after confessing, after getting that burden off his chest, he replied, quote, "I don't feel anything, period." End quote.
Yeah.
That's cold.
It is. Also, I'm like just the tiniest bit jealous.
To not feel anything?
Yeah. Just every so often. It'd be a nice break. But like, not forever. That would suck.
Do you think it's true that he felt nothing, or did he
I think it's true that
tell
he felt...
himself he didn't?
No, I think it's true that he felt nothing. I think he never felt anything ever. Not once in his entire life.
Probably, yeah.
I think he knew enough to be what people wanted to see when they looked at him.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was smart and sort of charming, it sort of...
Polite, friendly. Mm.
And he had a nice family, so you kind of overlook,
Yeah, true. So, in the early morning hours of 29th of November 1958, Lowell Lee Andrews was charged with the murders of his father William, his mother Opal, and his sister Jennie Marie. He was denied bail, and he had to wait for his trial in his cell at the Wyandotte County Jail. Also, the river was searched for the murder weapons. Remember, he had thrown them off a bridge. They used big magnets and divers, but as far as I understand, they only found parts of the two weapons. One of the weapons, the rifle, was actually a Christmas present.
Yeah, we have a picture of him with the police when they're retrieving the stuff he threw into the river. This is an article that interviews the Reverend, and this comes from the Kansas City Star, 29th of November, 1958, Saturday, page 1. Shock to a confessor. Minister at loss to explain murders. Andrews described as perfect family by the Reverend V.C. Dameron, by Jim Lapham, member of the Star staff. I don't know what I'm going to say in the morning, the Reverend V.C. Dameron said today with genuine concern. I've got to face several hundred people and explain to them how something like this could happen to a good church-going family like the Andrewses. How can you explain such a thing? The Andrews family had been in regular attendance at the Grandview Baptist Church, where Mr. Dameron is a pastor. Both the mother and father of the boy taught Sunday school. The father was a deacon in the church. They attended every service, not just on Sundays, but on Wednesday nights as well, Mr. Dameron said. Lowell, the boy's father, tithed his 10%, and he made good money, too. The triple slaying was especially stunning to Mr. Dameron. I was with the boy all night, and I still can't believe it, he said. What do you think when your best friend is killed by his own son? They were a perfect family. The parents were proud of the children. You could see the elation when they spoke of them. The son was going through college, the daughter attending the Oklahoma Baptist University at Shawnee. The children were fond of their parents. The boy cherished them, loved them. That's the way it looked. Mr. Dameron and the boy's father were lifelong friends, born on neighboring farms near Moberly, Missouri. It was the mother of Lowell Andrews who trudged through a blizzard to help bring Mr. Dameron into the world. Today, Mr. Dameron made his way through the snow to her home near Walcott on a much sadder mission to tell her of the death of her son. Lowell was my best friend, Mr. Dameron said. I know if there had been anything at all troubling him, any doubts about his son, he would have confided in me. There just wasn't any trouble, no reason for the shooting. Mr. Dameron spent more than 2 years as an Army chaplain in both the Atlantic and Pacific Theater in World War II. I saw some terrible things, he said, but nothing like this. End quote. Poor man.
So sad.
It's awful. Awful. I think it also, that really speaks, just the fact that he said, obviously he and William were such good friends that, like we said before, if there was anything like off or creepy or just anything where, geez, could this be a problem? The Reverend would probably have been the first person William would have spoken to, because he would have felt like he could have spoken to him in confidence and he was one of his best friends.
Yeah. Also, can you imagine him having to go to see William's mother, telling her that
Awful.
The son had died? Horrible.
Right.
And in that way,
of course, the whole family, everyone's gone.
Destroyed. So William, Opal, and Jennie Marie were buried in a family grave at the Mount Salem Cemetery in Exceller, Macon County, Missouri. Under Jennie's name, the word daughter is inscribed, mother under Opal's name, and father under William's name. Of course, Lowell's defense team tried to plead not guilty for reason of insanity, so he was sent to a clinic in Topeka where he was thoroughly examined. Apparently, the psychiatrists found that he was suffering from schizophrenia, but that he had been absolutely aware of what he was doing and that he had planned on murdering his family for several months. Lowell Lee Andrews was absolutely fine before and after the murder. He didn't suffer any head injuries. He didn't suffer from headaches. He hadn't shown any signs of any other physical or psychological episodes. Lowell was also very, very clear and outspoken that he understood that he needed to be punished for the crime he had committed. And in the end, he was sentenced to death by hanging and was now awaiting his execution at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, Kansas. He filled his long days with reading books, even more books than he had read before. Like now in his cell, he read 15 to 20 books per week. And he kept trying to appeal his death sentence, and he wanted it to be turned into a life sentence. But to no avail. On 30th of November 1962, around 12:21 a.m., he died on the prison gallows. He had enjoyed a huge last meal the evening before, including 2 whole fried chickens, and afterwards he had smoked a cigar.
So this comes from the Sacramento Bee, November 30th, 1962, page 27. Aloof model boy dies on gallows for killing family. Lansing, Kansas. Lowell Lee Andrews, the model boy who said greed led him to murder his family 4 years ago, died on the gallows today. If he repented his crime, he did not show it. Calm and composed, even a bit aloof, Andrews stood silently on the gallows trap, lighted by the glare of a single, unshaded bulb. Warden Sherman H. Krause asked if he had any last words. "No, I don't believe so," replied the 22-year-old killer, smiling slightly. The warden repeated the question. "No," Andrews said flatly. The Protestant chaplain of the state penitentiary, the Reverend James Post, removed Andrews' glasses, guards slipped the noose around his neck and the death mask over his face. At 12:21 a.m., the trap covering a hole in the concrete floor of the execution chamber was sprung. 18 minutes later, Andrews was pronounced dead by the prison physician. He was the 11th man to die since Kansas resumed capital punishment in the 1930s. About 20 observers filed silently out of the warehouse and across the yard. In the lighted cell block windows, some of the penitentiary's 1,956 convicts could be seen peering into the darkness, but there was no demonstration. End quote. So he ended up buried next to his family, and the headstone has his name and dates inscribed, and under it you can also read the word son. So
how do you feel about that?
I don't think it's okay. I mean, I don't I don't know. I don't think he deserves, like, his family would probably want him with them even after what he did.
I guess so too. That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
I feel like he doesn't deserve it.
I think the word son under it kind of hit me hard.
Yeah, I'm offended by it. Like, it should say son who murdered them all, or son who betrayed them, or something like that. You know, it's
But I think you're right. After all we read about the family, I really think they would have, well, at least the parents would have wanted him nearby.
Yep, I think
that's the kind of people they were, I think.
They loved him. That was their baby, of course.
And some of you might think, wait a minute, I never heard about this case, but it all sounds very familiar. Well, then you might have read Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood about the murder of the Clutter family. It's one of my earliest true crime books, and we definitely want to cover that crime in an episode soon enough. But for those of you who don't know the case, in 1959, 2 men broke into the home of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas, and murdered a family of 4. The 2 killers were named Perry Smith and Richard Hickok. Those 2 men, too, were sentenced to death, and they, too, awaited their execution on death row at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, at the same time as Lowell Lee Andrews was there. And so he and his crime are mentioned a couple of times in the book.
So this is from, of course, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Quote, Andy was a funny kid, Hickok said, smiling lopsidedly as he propped a cigarette between his lips. It was like I told him. He had no respect for human life, not even his own. Right before they hanged him, he sat down and ate 2 fried chickens. And that last afternoon, he was smoking cigars and drinking Coke and writing poetry. When they came to get him, and we said our goodbye, I said, I'll be seeing you soon, Andy, 'cause I'm sure we're going to the same place. So scout around and see if you can't find a cool, shady spot for us down there. He laughed and said he didn't believe in heaven or hell, just dust unto dust. And he said an aunt and uncle had been to see him and told him they had a coffin waiting to carry him to some little cemetery in North Missouri, the same place where the 3 he disposed of were buried. They planned to put Andy right alongside them. He said when they told him that, he could hardly keep a straight face. I said, well, you're lucky to have a grave. Most likely they'll give Perry and me to the vivisectionist. We joked on like that till it was time to go, and just as he was going, he handed me a piece of paper with a poem on it. I don't know if he wrote it or copied it out of a book. My impression was, he wrote it. If you're interested, I'll send it to you. He later did so, and Andrew's farewell message turned out to be the 9th stanza of Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. The boasts of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, await, like the inevitable hour, the paths of glory lead but to the grave. I really liked Andy. He was a nut, not a real nut like they kept hollerin', but you know, just goofy. He was always talking about breaking out of here and making his living as a hired gun. He liked to imagine himself roaming around Chicago or Los Angeles with a machine gun inside a violin case, cooling guys. He said he'd charge $1,000 per stiff. Hickok laughed, presumably at the absurdity of his friend's ambitions, sighed, and shook his head. But for someone his age, he was the smartest person I ever come across, a human library. When that boy read a book, it stayed read. Course, he didn't know a dumb darn thing about life. End quote. Yeah, that's when he liked to go by Andy.
Exactly.
When he was in prison. So, I do think it's interesting that he could hide his thoughts. It's like he could hide... It's like he hid for such a long time, and then when he finally did the thing that he'd been fantasizing about doing, could he not hide anymore, or did he just not want to hide anymore? That's the thing that I struggle with. You know, it's like, was his family just seeing what they wanted to see? Were they just super blind, but then everybody was blind? Or was just something released in him after the murders? Like, once he was free to act the way he wanted, he couldn't go back to hiding and pretending, if that makes sense. That's
what I think. I don't think that his family was blind, because as you see, everybody thought the same about him, everybody.
Right. There were no red flags. Zero red
usually,
flags.
you know, after something like this happens, you always find somebody who says, well, actually, I always thought he was odd, or there was this one time, but nothing like that at all.
Nope.
Yeah.
And he didn't kill the dog.
He didn't kill the dog, yeah. And I really think what you said, that he didn't want to hold it in anymore. Like this kind of, well, now it's all out there and now I can...
Now I'm the real me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a very twisted way, yeah. I don't think he hated his family. I don't think he went kind of, I don't want to sound wrong, but in a logical way about this. Like he had to also murder his sister because he wanted to have the whole inheritance, right?
Right. I agree. I don't think he hated anybody. I don't think he was capable of hate or of love.
Yeah.
I don't think he was capable of any kind of normal emotion like you and I would have.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I did find an article by Robert Kaplan. It was in an Australian journal called The Quadrant, and Robert Kaplan is a forensic psychiatrist and a professor at the Graduate School of Medicine at the University of Wollongong, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Australia. And so he's written many, many books. He's written books on murder cases, psychiatry, medicine. And so he writes about this case, and this is just a small snippet from this article that he wrote that I've just taken a couple pieces out to read to you. So it says, quote, "Remote as Kansas was, it was the leading center of psychiatry in the U.S., thanks to the famed Menninger Clinic in Topeka, the state capital. Founder William Menninger based it on the Mayo Clinic as a center of psychiatric excellence. Aided by his two sons, it became a leading training unit. People came from overseas to study there. The Menningers were the public face of U.S. psychiatry in the 50s, combining psychoanalysis with American positivism. According to this view, there was only a fine line separating most people from criminals. What was needed was treatment, not punishment. Andrews pleaded innocent by reason of insanity, which meant his defense needed to prove he was insane in terms of the Naughton rule. If that happened, Andrews would be sentenced to confinement in the state hospital for the criminally insane. The alternative case was to prove that he was eligible for the Durham rule, which holds that an accused is not criminally responsible if his unlawful act is the product of mental disease or mental defect. He could hardly have pleaded intellectual difficulties in view of his high intelligence. Okay, so basically they're saying they can't say that he didn't understand what was going on, or, they basically had to prove that he was insane. It was the only thing that would work because he was so clearly very, very smart. They couldn't claim diminished capacity. Okay, it goes on. Andrews went to the Menninger Clinic for assessment. He spent hours with Dr. Joseph Satin, a forensic psychiatrist with an interest in sudden murders committed with scant motive by perpetrators who appeared sane before and after the crime. That would be an interesting course of study, wouldn't it? Just people who seemed absolutely fine until they murdered someone, after which they were absolutely, quote-unquote, fine again, right?
Yeah.
So the article continues, Andrews was extensively tested. It can be assumed he had EEGs and the projective testing fashionable at the time, notably the Rorschach inkblot test. He frustratingly refused to play the game. He expressed no regret or remorse, was unconcerned about his likely fate, and, despite repeated encouragement, refused to voice any psychotic thoughts. All tests came back as normal. For his psychiatrist, the results were frustrating. Satin, who had also examined Smith and Hickok, was at a loss. Quote, Andrews felt no emotions whatsoever. He considered himself the only important, only significant person in the world, and in his own seclusive world, it seemed to him just as right to kill his mother as to kill an animal or a fly. End quote. He understood the nature of his acts, and that they were prohibited, and that he was subject to punishment. His motive was irrational. He hoped to inherit the family farm. If Andrews was found to be sane, judicial execution was a given, leaving Satin with a last desperate option, simple schizophrenia. This category was devised by, I would say, Eugen Bleuler, but you would say how?
Eugen Bleuler.
Well, the article says, this is the man who gave us schizophrenia as an alternative to the charmless term dementia praecox. It referred to a state of disorganization and poor social function without the characteristic psychotic symptoms that distinguished the condition. It was schizophrenia without the symptoms of schizophrenia, a martini without the gin, if you like. Simple schizophrenia was, from the start, an unhappy taxon with questionable clinical criteria. It could be applied to anyone in a rundown state and was used all too frequently on tramps, vagrants, and other social misfits as a form of social control. this is a really important point, how often this term was used to keep certain people subjugated. It continues. Whatever ideas he held, Andrews did not show any signs of personality deterioration. What he had done was mad, even if psychosis could not be demonstrated. But if Andrews did not have simple schizophrenia, what could explain the cold-blooded murder, overkill if we are to go by the number of bullets, of his parents and sister? Many would say that to enact such a brutal slaying was simply mad. Yes, but by what standard? The legal and psychiatric definitions of insanity overlap, but little more, and have even less in common with the public conception of madness. End quote. It's a really interesting article, and we're going to provide a link to it. Kaplan, because he is a forensic psychiatrist, he goes on to discuss some of the other possible diagnoses that he feels Andrew may have been suffering from, and that will probably be a very interesting discussion in our Facebook group. But in the end, as far as this case goes, it really seems very, very clear that he completely knew what he was doing. He planned it out. He knew why he wanted to do it. I don't know if the mental illness aspect comes in to play when he seems to be this very smart man who came up with exactly how he would murder his family, and he knew why he wanted to do it, but there was no follow-through. It just kind of collapsed after that, right?
Yeah.
But he definitely knew right from wrong.
I think so too. And it didn't take him long to confess. Like, they didn't show him evidence or pressure him.
Right.
I mean, it was just the Reverend talking to him and telling him, I think it's actually, he said, you didn't do it, right? You didn't do that. And he was like, yeah, I did. And that's how he confessed. Also, I think in a way it mattered to him how he appeared to other people, but only on a very superficial level.
Right.
He showered, he shaved, he put on a suit. I even think the book he read was chosen
intentionally
with a motive in mind.
I'm sure.
But he didn't care on the emotional level.
Right.
It was all very superficial, yeah.
Very super. It's like he understood how superficial our society is, really, isn't it? It's like, do you remember, and I keep meaning to look up more, I know there's been updates, but do you remember not long ago, it was here in the US, there was this absolutely horrific case where these children were all being held, like, chained up in the house.
Yeah.
And, like, nobody knew. Nobody in the neighborhood knew.
Yeah.
And I think our society today is really very superficial, isn't it? We just want to skim the surface, make sure everything looks okay on the surface. And as long as everything sort of seems okay, then we assume everything's sort of okay. And I think just the way our society in general works, we sort of make it easy for that sort of just surface level deception to work so well. But I think he was really good at it. Like, I don't think the family missed signs or anything.
I don't think so neither. He didn't snap. It's not a case of he got angry or nothing. He just had decided to murder his family for money. He was never mistreated. He had money. Like, they gave him. They gave him. Yeah. And he even said so. It's not like he didn't
want for anything.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It just blows our minds because it's so hard to imagine that you would ever.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating case. It's a sad case.
Very sad.
Yeah.
Very sad.
All right.
That's it. Do you have something good? My something good is on Sunday. We are invited with one of our longest and best friends to celebrate his birthday. We're going to a Chinese restaurant and we're really looking forward to that.
Oh, that's going to be nice.
It's a very close friend of Philip and mine. More for Philip, but also for me. And he's definitely our longest friend.
Nice. Oh, that'll be great.
Yeah. How about you?
No, Opus. Opus is always my something good, my little baby. I've been getting him these, like, pajamas online because he gets really cold. He really does get cold. He has no undercoat. It's like... really, he's so soft. He's so soft. There's just nothing. It's like hair and then skin. I've had boyfriends who were hairier than he is. It's wild. So he wears sweaters and sweatshirts, and I got him this new sweatshirt, and it's like a black and white stripe. And so now I keep calling him my little bumblebee. I said we should really put it away and save it for next year because... oh, he's just the cutest little bee in the world.
He's so cute.
He's such a big bee. He likes it.
I was laughing when you sent me a message. There's a big bee inside.
There's a huge bee in the house. I know, he's so cute. I buy them from this group, this like pajama group. I think they're made in Australia and they're sent over and like all the proceeds go to a charity. And but it's really hard to get them. You have to like, it's stressful. You have to be like ready for the sale and get online, and it's hard to find Great Dane clothes. So
I can imagine.
Yeah. And if he doesn't have a sweatshirt or like a pajamas on when he goes to bed, he just tries to lie completely on top of me so he can suck the warmth out of my body. And that's fine. He's just got 47 elbows and I can't take it. At 3 a.m, I always think someone's trying to murder me. It's like, oh no, it's just the dog's cold.
Jem always crawls under the blanket when he's cold. Like he really wakes me up.
Our beagle was a tunneler. Yeah, under the blankies.
And I have to open the blanket, I have to lift it, and then he crawls under the blanket and sleeps.
Yeah, you have to lift it up for him because...
You have to, yeah.
Yeah, it's too much work to get it open with your nose. That's just exhausting.
Well, he's not... I mean, we are his servants.
That's
we
exactly
have to lift
how it
the
works.
blanket. Yeah, that's the beagle. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please do us the huge favor and go to your podcast app and check if you can leave us a rating and or review. We really love them. We do appreciate them, and they do help us.
They do. You can even review every episode individually on Audible now, which is terrifying. Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Please don't. Especially not the early ones, please.
Whatever you're going to say, we already know. It's fine.
Check out our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com. There you find links to our merch store. We're working on some Christmas merch right now. To our email address, which is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. To our Instagram, our Facebook group, which is the loveliest group of weirdos out there.
So good.
What else? To our P.O. box. If you want to send us Christmas presents, hey, we're open to everything. Don't send us something mean, though, please. Not dog poop.
Oh
we have enough.
God. Can you imagine spending all that money to forward yourself dog poop? Great. Happy New Year.
I think that's it. Please.
I think that's it.
Be kind to your dogs. We just had a little scare with Jem, where we had to have his stomach, I don't want to say pumped, but where they had to make him throw up because he ate something that could have been poison, and he's fine, don't worry. What I want to say is take them to the vet if it's necessary. Please take care of them, cuddle them, hug them, feed them, let them under the blanket, lift the blanket for them.
Don't make them get under it by themselves, you monster.
Be kind to your fellow human beings. Don't let them walk all over you, but everybody deserves a little chance. And the hardest part of it all, be kind to yourself. And that's it.
That's right. And until next week, please remember that if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.